Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's Wednesday. Welcome to HASP this morning. I'm Sue Couch. I'm a member of the Science, Medical, and Technology Committee. I'm very excited to have some representatives or a representative, Kari Bliss, today from Lewis Padnos to talk about sustainability. I'm sure many of you have had an opportunity to drive by the Padnos facility along the river. I always wondered what they were doing back there, crunching cars. You hear a lot of noise. There's big fences, everything there. They do so much more. And it's going to be a great talk today. Sustainability has been a topic that's been requested over and over again by HAS members. And so I'm especially proud that we have a company in our town that lives it, breathes it, and grows that opportunity. Anyway, I'd like to introduce Kari Bliss. She's from Lewis Padnos, and she leads the sustainability at Padnos, an industrial recycler of paper, plastics, metals, and electronics. And they have more than 25 locations in Michigan and Northern Indiana. She has multiple sustainability certifications and is a board member of the Michigan Sustainable Business Forum and the Society of Plastics Engineers Recycling Division. She's going to be our presenter for our first session today, and Randy Knippi, who will be here next week, will be our presenter then. She is offering to take questions throughout the presentation, so raise your hand. Make sure you give me a chance to run over with a mic so the people on the Zoom call can hear the questions and the answer. And so I'll turn it over to Kari.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being here. I love all the curious faces. It also sort of cracks me up that the back of the room filled up first. I have teenagers. It's exactly what would have happened with my teenagers. But it's wonderful to see you here. And I guess you can probably see a little bit better from the back. So I guess that is okay. Oh, yeah, that's true. That's a good example. So the Padnos family has been in this community for a really long time. Lewis Padnos first got here and founded his company in 1905. So over 100 years, about 118 years ago at this point. It is still privately held, which is a big deal. There's not that many companies left that are privately held. Family owned, 4 generations strong. And in this picture, 3 of the generations are represented. So you will see many of these people around the community because they live here, they work here, their children go to school here. It's a wonderful family. I'm so fortunate to be able to work with them. We do recycle paper, plastic, metals, and electronics. And to give you a little bit of an idea, last year we recycled 4.7 billion pounds of material. So pretty big impact. There's a lot of things that you might hear in the news, and we'll get into a little bit of that, but that we never slowed down. We never stopped. We were considered an essential business during the COVID. So we just keep on going and growing. We do have 30 locations now throughout Michigan, 1 in Northern Indiana. So that gives you a little idea of the scope, but the materials that we buy and trade are commodities. So at the end of the day, all of the normal market forces around the globe impact our business. And so we sell the materials usually to the highest bidder. Now, of course, we have some arrangements and agreements with local businesses because if we can support our fellow local businesses, that's always a benefit to everyone. But they're commodities, they trade. So what does it mean? This percentage here, literally, that's how few companies that are privately held have been around for over 100 years. So it is special and it does make a difference. Not only are, the dollars that we're generating staying in the community, our tax dollars, the incomes that we're paying for people, but then what we do with our extra, is support things that are important to the community, whether that's building sculptures that you've probably noticed around town, whether that's adding a garden rooftop at the Meyer Gardens, which isn't too far from Holland over in Grand Rapids, or whether it's donating to schools, colleges, or doing events like this. Having locally owned businesses really does impact your community in a lot of ways, and we're very proud to be part of that history. So I'm going to go through these next couple of slides super fast because some of you may already know something about Padnos, but I love our story, our history for where the company has gone through the decades. So in the 1900s, Louis started to emigrate over from Russia, actually, and he made his way through kind of the traditional pathway all the way to Chicago. And it was in that area that people learned he could speak Dutch and started to say, you know, there's a bunch of people going to relocate over in the Holland area. You should go check that out. And that's literally how he ended up over here. You can see one of the first location pictures in that middle slide. And then he met Helen and they got married. One thing that I think is super cool is the company's been fairly progressive since the very beginning. When the company was incorporated, Helen was 100% partner. That didn't really happen back then. So she was very actively involved and, you know, the kids were actively involved. Everybody was involved in making this company a success. Some more pictures as we go through the 40s, 50s. The one in the 50s there, that is the second generation. So Stuart and Louis in their younger days. And then as we started to grow through the 60s and 70s into the 80s, now you see third generation. They are still very much around and involved as an advisory council. So they will come in whenever we have a challenging situation. But trust me when I tell you that they read everything. They read all the board reports. They read all the financial reports. And some of the smartest people I think I've ever met in my entire life. They are very quick to help make sure that we stay true to our culture and our values as a company. In the 2000s, we hit our 100-year anniversary, which was pretty exciting. Those are some of the team members that got together for that photo op. And then in 2010 is when the fourth generation started to join the company. So our current CEO, Jonathan Padnos, he's part of that fourth generation, and his two cousins, which are identical twins and quite confusing. I still struggle to this day to tell them apart, are part of the company as well. This is our purpose statement, and we talk about it all the time. So it's important to us when we're talking, whether it's our value statements or our purpose statement, that it is alive. And these aren't things that we found on Google and put in, you know, because it sounded good. We spent about a year trying to really develop this to make sure it was something that was real, something that we could stand behind. Some of the industries we work with, a lot of automotive. Obviously, we are in Michigan. There is so many OEMs, tier ones, suppliers, and even some of the not local auto manufacturers, international automakers have plants in our state. So the tier one and tier two supply chain that feeds into those OEMs has a lot of our customers. We also work with the furniture industry. So that's probably the second biggest industry in our region. We do work with large chains. So whether that's a Spartan Nash or a Meyer, you think about all those goods getting shipped, they come in packaging, there's waste associated with that can be aggregated and sent and recycled. And then we work with large packaging companies. So a lot like Orbis does returnable dunnage, returnable skids. So these are usually plastic skids, plastic totes, knockdown bins. They're used in the manufacturing process, but it gets people out of having to use single-use materials and into something that can be used over and over again. So now let's talk a little bit about how that dovetails into the history of recycling, because how did we even end up where we are today? I like going back to the 1920s, because even though we were busy doing trading, that trading might have been wood or furs or rags or whatever this side of town needed and this side of the town had. We started with a cart. Like, we didn't have a horse at first. We started literally with a cart that would get pulled back and forth. Eventually that turned into a cart. Eventually that turned into a vehicle. But back in the 20s, nobody had enough of anything. So we were helping make sure people had the things that they needed. But the word recycling didn't exist yet. Nobody was thinking about that. It was really as we started to move forward into World War II that the scrap drives came about. So it was, I love this era. And I think we're to a certain degree having a renaissance of this era with our younger generation. It's like, use it up. My kids, they won't even go to the mall to shop. They literally go to Goodwill or different thrift stores to shop. Like it's cool. So I'm like all for it because not only does it save me money, but it's what's best for the environment. Make sure we're using things up. There's a huge renaissance right now happening with the Right to Repair Act, not making these electronics and different things that you use it for a year, it breaks, and now there's nothing you can do with it except for throw it away. So I love that we can go through history and we can see how this narrative has changed decade to decade and come back to some of the ideas that really made sense at the time. Moving forward into the 50s and 60s, and it's where some of the problems started. At the time, it seemed like a panacea. Women, you don't have to slave away in the kitchen and cook and clean all those dishes. You can have single-use plastics, and they're amazing. And go on a picnic with your family. And now all of this stuff doesn't need to be reused. But it's caused a few problems down the way. And so what can we do about that? It probably makes you a little uncomfortable to see babies wrapped in cellophane. It made me a little uncomfortable, but that's why I keep it in here, because I'm like, wow, has that marketing message changed? We would not do that today. It's interesting, right? So then we get into the 70s. And in the 70s, we knew we had a problem because there was a lot of litter created by what was happening in the 50s and 60s. And so I remember, I'm old enough to remember Woodsy and Give a Hoot, Don't Pollute. So I have to throw this in there because that's what my childhood was all about. We would go camping or go on hikes with my family. And it was, anything you take, you have to take back out. So you don't ever leave litter anywhere. And so my generation started to be raised with that. The first Earth Day was created. And there was something else going on behind the scenes. And that was these durable goods, a lot of automobiles were getting dumped everywhere, right? Because they had reached the end of their life. Nobody knew what to do with them. There wasn't anywhere to take them to be recycled. We were very fortunate that we had Lady Bird Johnson end up being our first lady, and not just our first lady of the White House, but our first lady really of the environment. She came in and said, I really care about this, and instituted so many amazing national programs that helped us clean up our act so that the cars and things had a place to go. And that was really the advent or the invention of the car shredder. Something that could take these cars and now recover the metals. This is a picture from the New York Times of Holland, our site in Holland, after we installed that first shredder. And it was a pretty big deal at the time, obviously, if it made it all the way to the New York Times from Holland in 1971. So I'm going to pause for 1 second before I start talking about the auto processing. Does anyone have any questions so far, just about the history? It's okay that you don't. We haven't really gotten into the, oh, we got one.
What's the Right to Repair Act?
Oh, that's a great question. So the Right to Repair Act really came about because of, I think a lot of it came from phones, to be honest with you, like consumer electronics. So I don't know how many of you have had a mobile phone. I'm not going to pick on any particular brand, but you've had one of those lovely smartphones. And after about a year and a half, 2 years, it stops holding its charge. It starts acting really kind of funky. And you look at it and you can't take it apart. You can no longer replace the battery. There's nothing you can do with it. And so the Right to Repair Act is starting to put some guidelines for businesses to have to follow so that their products can be repaired, right? I mean, you used to be able to go around and bring your lawnmower to, I mean, you still can a little bit, but there used to be repair shops everywhere. I mean, you wouldn't get rid of your TV because it broke. You would bring it to the repair shop and they would take it apart and they'd fix it. That doesn't happen hardly at all anymore because it's so inexpensive to buy a new TV. It doesn't pay to have the old one repaired. So it's really working around those ideas. That's a great question.
Okay, when I first came here, I started playing tennis with Stu Panos. He's second generation.
He is second generation.
And actually, he had a tennis court in his yard. So he sometimes played there.
Fantastic.
And he played well into his 80s, almost as old as I am.
That is fantastic. He is a great person. Yeah.
I have a question. The OEM that you referred to at the beginning, what does that mean?
That's another great question. So sometimes I forget the jargon and my industry is intense, but OEM stands for original equipment manufacturer. So it's anybody like General Motors, Ford, Miller Knoll, they would be original equipment manufacturers. And it's how we refer to them versus the suppliers that feed into them.
I was thinking that one reason Holland is ideal for Padnos is because of the barge access through the canal.
100%.
Was that already true in 1905? I mean, was it one of the reasons that besides speaking Dutch, he knew that the lake access was rare?
That's a
and
great
ideal
question. And
from
I'm not going to
Holland?
make up an answer because I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
But I will actually dig into that because I think it's a really good question.
Okay.
And I don't know if I know the answer.
When was the channel wide enough? I mean, I wonder.
I don't know, but that's a great, I'm curious
interesting
about
to know,
that.
yeah.
Got a question in the back. And
I'll
over there.
come back in a minute. We have a little bit of an answer to that, I think.
Oh, fantastic.
So,
I love it.
So Doug Padnos is, he still plays tennis. Anyhow, Doug's a very good personal friend. Doug explained to me one thing. I can't tell you when the channel opened, but the thing that's very interesting to understand is, and I'm just going to do this in relative terms, if shipping a ton of product via boat is $100, shipping a ton of product on the railroad car is $1,000. And shipping a ton of product in a truck is $10,000. Each one is an order of magnitude more expensive. That's why the waterfront access is so important to the effectiveness to move the product to the people who are going to, the mills, the whatever. So it's a very vivid comparison of the difference.
And that is 100% true for the economics. But the reason why those economics are true is because you can fit so much more material on the barge. It's not that the barge itself is necessarily more economical to move. It's that you fit so much more. So not only are you reducing that cost of being able to ship the goods to the end user, but you're reducing your carbon footprint because a barge doesn't use anywhere near the amount of carbon and diesel fuel as a truck. So that's a huge benefit for the environment. So it is huge. So thank you very much. That was a very good analogy.
Besides planned obsolescence, which is a way to keep companies growing and inventing things, the result of non-recyclables or understood to be non-recyclables until someone figures out you can because it's bad because of the liquids or the metal or yada yada. I think that there's a lot of people that just don't know, for example, take your electronics to you guys because people have things like batteries or electrons
100%.
or whatever. So my point is more marketing.
I completely agree with you. And that is exactly why I'm here.
I mean, the way to,
You need to spread that word, right? Like it's confusing. And I'll be honest, we are not the largest recycler, but we have so much diverse processing capability. We actually have more diverse processing capability than any other recycler in the world. So sometimes we can get hung up on how do we explain to people what we do and what we don't do, what your waste hauler does. I have a few slides to go into that because you are spot on correct.
and HASP is great for that, but how do you get larger market penetration of knowledge? Because trust me, there's probably reams of people that just chunk batteries because they don't know what the heck to do with them, or they've been told,
Or they
people
have a
don't take 'em.
drawer of mobile devices that they're afraid to recycle because there's data on there and they don't understand what controlled, secure data destruction is. That's the other thing that I'll see. They won't get rid of it.
Going to tell us where then we can bring those things?
Yes, it's
Great.
in this presentation. I will not leave you hanging.
Okay, and one more question. So you're still using barges, haven't switched to rail?
We use both. So if there is a mode of moving material, we use it. And it is important that we have access to all of those different modes. Randy's going to go into a little bit more detail on the logistics when he comes next week, because that's really his expertise. But during COVID specifically, when things were shutting down and you couldn't get truck drivers, the barge is what kept America moving. I mean, it was a big deal. We even started using river barges so that we could send material down the Mississippi River. It was critically important. There's so many needs of the materials that we generate that just wouldn't have been able to make its way into the market without the barge or the riverboats. That's a good question, but he'll go into more detail. All right, so back to auto processing. And it's not that all we do is auto processing, but it's a really good example of a complex, durable good that has a lot of different materials in it, right? There's plastic, there's metals, there's non-ferrous metals, there's hazardous materials. All these things have to be addressed. So that first step is fluid recovery, because we don't want to waste anything. Our goal is always to make the best use of all resources. So when we go to recover those fluids in the vehicle, we're making sure that we're using equipment that doesn't allow any fugitive emissions to escape. So it's a sealed spike that goes into, whether it's the coolant in the car, the gasoline, or the oil in the car. It suctions all of that out. It goes into an individual collection tank, and then those materials all get recycled as well. Super critically important, because people, don't drain those fluids. And we actually don't even want people to drain them themselves, to be honest, whether it's a refrigerator or a car, because we're too afraid that their answer, and they won't know what to do with the fluid, will be to just dump it in the drain. So we would rather do it. So there's a cost to us to remove these fluids, but we just feel it's so important as a community member that we help, since we know how to do it and we can aggregate those fluids and move them into the market, that we're providing that as a service. The next step often is crushing the vehicle. Now, if you as a community member bring your car in, it may or may not get crushed before we shred it, because it's not a necessary thing. But if you were a dealer, let's say you were an aftermarket part seller, and you were getting in hundreds of cars because you were, looking for the usable, resellable parts on those vehicles to put in the market, you might have 400, 1,000, 2,000 cars at a time. Well, then it makes sense. We have this mobile crusher that we send out, and we can crush, they can borrow it for 3 days, crush all those vehicles. And again, that's greatly reducing the cost of freight and the carbon footprint from shipping those vehicles maybe across the state to one of our shredders. Then comes the shred process. So we never recycled just cars. And if you think about it, that car, as it goes up the belt, is going to have a tipping point. And when that tipping point happens, the vehicle is going to have a big gap on the belt. So we want to have a steady stream of material that's going through that shredder all the time. So we have our pile of everything that's going to get shredded, but they're going to very selectively sprinkle a car, so maybe a water heater, a refrigerator, somebody's bicycle, so that that throughput stays at a consistent speed, so we can maximize the equipment to the best of our ability to get the materials back out. And that's a little better picture of the shred process. It's big. Yeah, and it was just this fun fact. This shredder was featured in a movie, 60 seconds or less, I think it was. And it was like a mob picture with maybe not the best things, but we were featured in that movie. So kind of cool. It's kind of fun. Then at the end of all that is the stuff that's not recyclable. So 98% of the metals that we take into the shredder are able to be recovered and recycled. This, however, not so much. To the average person, it looks like garbage. But a number of years ago, I was looking into this pile, and actually I had taken one of our interns out to lunch. And she's the one that made me aware of just how much of this ASR is what it's called, even though it's more than autos, we already covered that, goes out into a landfill. Now, it's not quite just landfill. It is used as landfill cover. And what landfill cover does is it encapsulates the landfill, which does two important things for the community. It allows them to be able to capture the methane gas that's generated in the landfills naturally. So that's important. And it keeps the landfill from smelling. Also very important, especially if you are a neighbor of the landfill. So the landfill operators actually like the material because they don't have to buy sawdust or wood chips or something else to encapsulate their landfill. But at the same time, I looked at it and was like, I see a lot of really good plastic in there. And that's my background. My expertise is in plastics, and I wanted to figure out how to recover that. Might have been. happy to say we are never affiliated with the mob. So today, as I mentioned, 98% of that car metal can be recycled. It is recycled. And we have a series of equipment. Randy will go into more detail on it that allows us to be able to sort all of these different materials. So one thing in general to remember is even though what you might do at home, and I'll go into more detail, is kind of simple, like it's paper, it's plastic. When you actually get to the real recycling of these commodities, there are thousands in each of these categories, and all of it matters. It's chemistry. There is, whether you're talking about plastic and it's a molecular chain, or you're talking about metallurgy and the different chemistries that go into that product, there is so much science involved in what we do. It's very important. And it's one of the reasons why we support education as much as we do. And anybody who works at Padnos can basically go to school for free, which is great. But not only can you go and educate yourself, because we have a culture of learning, we actually have a dependent scholarship program. I'm super excited about having 3 teenagers about ready to get started with college. But if one of my kids goes to a Michigan university, any of the Michigan universities, 70% of their tuition will be paid by Padnos, which is pretty significant. And I don't think there's another company in existence that does that. But it goes back to making sure that we continue to educate ourselves and our community. So what's the issue? We've got a lot of car parts getting turned into plastic. So this literally was taken last week at a show that I went to. So I was speaking at an automotive composites, plastic composites show. And I'm glad I was speaking, I'm glad I was a keynote, and I can have a little talk about this. But when we make rims out of aluminum, 100% of it gets recycled. I mean, you don't see, if you go to a landfill, you won't see a bunch of car rims because there's a value to that aluminum and it's very easy to reprocess. What you're seeing here is a composite plastic. Not easy to recycle, very difficult to recycle. And there's not a cost benefit analysis that works right now to recycle it. And I am a for-profit business. I'm not going to apologize for that. If I'm not making money with the shredder, I turn it off. I'm not obligated, right? Like I want to do it. It's the right thing to do, but I have to at least make enough money that I can keep paying team members to operate the equipment that we have. So as individuals in the community, one of the first things you can do is pay attention to, you're educating yourself. That's the first step. But when you buy something, what can happen to it at the end of life? And make sure if it's a plastic, it's not overly complicated. The other picture here is actually of a Mercedes that is in production. That entire front end is composite plastic now. I don't know if there's enough metal to justify me shredding it anymore. That's a problem. And I'm worried about it, right? Because yeah, it's not going to be a problem for 15 years, but I care about my kids. I care about my kids' future kids. It's going to be an issue. And I don't want to go back to having the cars dumped in the forest and on the side of the road. But we have to be able to solve these challenges. We started talking about this back in 1990. We worked with Grand Valley at the time and helped create a design for recycling curriculum. It's helped a little, but so much emphasis is put on the carbon footprint of that product up until the product is made. They sometimes forget about what happens after it leaves their manufacturing plant. Now, in fairness, it is a little bit challenging for them because once somebody buys the product, who knows where it goes, right? Like they lose visibility on what happens to that product. But they need to spend more time talking to the people that deal with end-of-life products to make sure what they're designing actually can be recycled at the end of life. It's not just theoretical, because anything, I could probably tell you theoretically how to recycle anything. But without having the infrastructure in place to be able to aggregate the materials and enough economics to justify processing the materials, it isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen. There's no wishful happening. Like there has to be a plan and a process to make it happen. All right. So these are just some additional pictures here of cars and some of the other materials that we recycle. And this is how we're going to talk about circular economy just a little bit, because circular economy is live and well right now when it comes to metals. These are some of the phases that it goes through. We get it, we grind it, we crush it, we send it through. It's going to go, there's a barge picture on there. Maybe it goes on a truck. And then it's going to go to a foundry or a mill to be made into new product. Then it goes right back in to the process to make more products. So this is real circular economy, regardless of what people talk about, in my opinion, because it's really working and it has been working for decades. So there's a lot to be said for making things out of metal. So then how did we get here? Because I don't know, has you heard about the Sustainable Development Goals? Raise your hand if you've at least heard of that or heard about, so a couple of you have heard about it. So, you know, we get together with other nations, we come up with things like the Paris Agreement, we come up with Sustainable Development Goals, and these are just guidelines to like try to be better citizens of the planet is probably the way that I like to think about it. But now it's getting real because we have things like the EU directive that have come out that are requiring significant change to happen with the products. And it's difficult if you're one of those OEMs to have one plan for this country and a different plan in Japan and a different plan in Europe. It's much easier for them to have one basic car that meets all the requirements for all of the different places that they may sell their product. And it also helps us build the right infrastructure to deal with those products at the end of life. You may have heard some things about the SEC and how they're starting to regulate. So that really comes into greenwashing. So there is a problem with greenwashing. Those companies will take what they know theoretically and say, well, this is recyclable. And you have products, I guarantee you right now in your car, in your homes, that say that it's 100% recyclable. And I will probably find at least 50% of those that I tell you, theoretically, it's 100% recyclable, but there is nowhere for you to drop it off, take it, and actually recycle it. So is it recyclable if there's no infrastructure in place to really do that work? So more people are speaking up about this, and now the SEC is involved in saying, if you as a company are going to make a claim and say something's recyclable, you better prove it. And if you can't prove it, we're going to fine you. And that's a big deal because that's infecting the investment community. So then you have big investment brokerages like BlackRock that are going out and saying, we aren't going to, you know, that's too much risk. We don't want to see that risk. And they are evaluating companies, and it's changing the value of those companies because those companies need money in order to stay in business. And so then they don't know what to do, right? So there's just a lot of confusion out in the marketplace right now around this topic. I'm going to go back to the picture of the circular economy for metal. It works. It's great. This is maybe calling it circular economy is new, but the concept isn't new. It's been around for decades. So what does it mean for other materials other than metal, where it pretty much works? To me, the way I look at this, it's a couple of things. First of all, people will use the word closed loop and circular economy interchangeably. I like to define them separately. When I'm talking about someone having a closed loop program, what I'm talking about is they manufacture a product. The manufacturing of that product has off-fall, so scrap that's generated, whether that's startup scrap if it's plastic or a skeleton from a stamping plant. There's some form of waste that's part of that process that then gets recycled as a post-industrial product. If the customer chooses, they can say, Padnos, we would like you to keep that material for us. We inventory it with the tag and barcode system separate. They own it the whole time it goes through our process. And then we give it back to them so they can reuse it. So the material's going from their product back into their product, closed loop. Circular economy doesn't have those restrictions. It's making the best use of all resources. I can take the waste from this chair and go put it in a pet dish or a dustpan or whatever product is needed from the materials that come out of it. It's complex when you look at this diagram, like how all those things fit together. It's a major matchmaking game. It's like solving Tetris or a puzzle, right? I have to get all those pieces to kind of work. but it allows our free market economy to be at its best, where the values of the materials drive what happens. And you don't need a bunch of regulation to make it happen. Like, it works because this person has a need, this person has the product, and you match it up. So I am a fan of it when it's done correctly. It just has to require a lot of education on the front end to make sure that people are telling the truth and that they know it's possible. No, that's okay.
But before you go,
I
on to
take it
another-
affectionately.
Before you go on to another topic, I had a question because
Yeah.
before I lose
Yeah, this is
sight
a
of
good
it.
part for break.
And it's about research and development.
Yeah.
You gave an example of how you're using some of the materials left over from the car smashing for covering, you know, a landfill.
Mhm.
So somewhere, someone did some research and determined that's a use for that product. How do you widen the circle of the circular economy to allow for research and development? Or what's happening now in terms of taking parallel processes and where you can identify, for example, I'll make something up. They're trying to find better ways to make or substitutes for concrete. Again, you look at the footprint for that.
Mhm.
So what's happening in terms of the industry in R&D or research and development to identify those uses? Because they may not fall within your loop, but there's someone else over here that could benefit that isn't in your loop. So how does that
100%.
work?
Yeah, so that's a big topic. I could probably come back and talk about just that for a couple of hours, to be honest. But I'll try and, so first of all, I am going to show you some of the R&D that we do. Randy will go into more detail next week. So you'll get some of it from a PADNOS perspective. But on a bigger scale level, if you've heard of the Inflation Reduction Act, or you've seen, all you have to do is do a Google search for EPA and grants, the Department of Energy and grants. And there is a lot of money available right now to do that kind of development work. What's interesting is it used to be only academics or national labs could apply for those grant funds. That all started to shift during COVID. And we have been applying now for grants and able to partner. So it's important you build a team, right? Where you have an academic structure, whether that's a Hope College or Western Michigan, U of M, Michigan State. We've partnered with these different universities. And we will work with the national lab, but now we're bringing the real nuts and bolts into the conversation. So they have, you know, the whole staff of PhDs and all the theories, but now we're running it in real equipment that's meant to be scaled. So in short, that's the biggest way that it's happening, is that those dollars, and really it's your dollars, it's your tax money that's funding it, to try to solve some of these wicked problems, is what I call them. They're just very, very difficult and complex, and it requires getting all your stakeholders to the table at the same time. So one of the projects specifically to the ASR, I'll talk about just a little bit. There's an organization called US CAR, US AMP, and it is Stellantis, Ford, and General Motors together. So for 2.5 years, we studied that ASR mix and tried to figure out how to solve for that plastics. And we figured it out. So we do have a solution for it. We still have to figure out how to commercialize that solution and make the numbers work. But we are able to take a good percentage of the plastics. So if you take, the average car has about 100 pounds of plastics that we can now recover, in theory. We still have to build all the infrastructure to do it. That makes sense. So it's using a combination. Now, that particular project did not have any grant funds, but at least we were able to get 3 of the major automotive companies to the same table, put all of those bright minds to work, and come up with some sort of a solution. We're working on something similar with the office furniture, because we have another big 3 here in West Michigan. So similar, you know, to work with some of the issues and challenges in that industry. It's just more brains makes it better. There has to be collaboration. So it used to be that all of those different for-profits were so busy holding their trade secrets, right? That progress couldn't get made. And so we took a chance, to be honest, and said, you know, this is too important. This is beyond our paychecks. Like, we need to do something. This is a problem, and we're the experts, and we have to share enough information to make sure we can continue to move forward. And so that shift has really happened with the 4th generation at PADNOS. It's a mind shift that transparency is the new normal with AI and everything that's happening. there aren't any secrets anymore, and that honestly, even if I tell people exactly what it is we do, it doesn't give away our secret sauce, because trust me, the scrap industry is really, really hard. It takes years to be competent at it.
Well, last night, PBS NewsHour, there was, I think it was, that's where I saw it, was a whole issue of, that's called ghost gear, which is, a lot of waste in terms of fishing gear, old, lobster pots, whatever, in the, main, bay or whatever it's called. And they're trying to figure out what to do with all that waste. One of the things they're first doing is they're separating it, plastic and whatever, metal and the like, and trying to then where to go with it. Well, there's a loop there. There's a circular economy, although it's primarily driven by volunteers rather than by industry. So you look at, okay, how do we connect the dots where you've got that effort over there and you've got your commercial effort? And is that happening? Is there a network where people are not working in their own closed loop, excuse the pun, but looking at how those loops can overlap?
So yes, in that particular example, I did not watch the PBS special. However, I do work with BASF, and they are the main company that's working on that fishing net, fishing gear issue. And they're perfectly suited for it. And they've, and then they pull in other experts. So they've called me, they've talked to me about it. So I think it's happening a little bit more organic than it is structured. Like there's not a mandate or a rule that says it has to happen, but we all realize there's a problem. Like BASF wants to keep being able to make plastics. So they have to start solving for some of the problems that plastics have created. They know that, otherwise they're going to be told we can't make plastic nets anymore, and they don't want that because they make a lot of nylon and that's what goes into those nets. So I think more of that's probably happening. What's not happening is it's not getting into the news. There's no PBS special about it, and that's where I think there maybe needs to be some change. And it's hard because it's pretty highly technical. So how do you do it? Even when I'm at the conference I was at last week, which literally was full of PhDs, not everybody agreed. Like they don't agree. And so that's where it gets tricky to be able to do the education, is that it tends to be biased towards what you believe and not necessarily holistic and open, like an open discussion. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. All right. So how does this impact you? Speaking of the ocean, that was a pretty good segue for me. This is the Pacific Gyre, the great garbage patch. So I like to show this just because it is so much in the news, right? You hear so much about it. It is serious. It's a big issue. However, this is mostly full of single-use plastics. So if you remember that slide I showed you of the 50s and 60s and the take, make, throw away mentality, that is what has created this. What PADNOS does is more durable good recycling. So it's important you understand that. I'll go into more detail of where you take single stream type materials, single use curbside materials versus what we do. But this is real. This isn't a joke. It is a problem. We have killed off entire species at the microbe level already. That is going to impact the entire food chain. Climate change is real, no matter how conservative you look at it. Like we can see it. The events that are happening around the world on a regular basis now are very serious. And this is a big problem. And we want to do our part. So the one way that we have been involved and tried to do our part is we decided to go down to the Virgin Islands, probably because we like the Virgin Islands, but it did have a big problem. So when we talk about ocean-bound plastic, it's a lot easier to solve this problem by keeping it from getting in the ocean in the first place than trying to figure out how to scoop the plastic out of the ocean. The environment changes the chemistry of plastic. So you need to understand that. Having sun beat on that plastic, having the salt water, being soaked in it, all of those things starts to change the molecular structure of the plastic. So it is really hard to recycle the plastics that are already in the ocean. But if I can create a collection system for people to use, I can stop it from ever going there. If you go down to some place like St. John, there is no, without what we've helped build there, there is nowhere to recycle your plastics. The island is simply not big enough. Everything on the island qualifies as ocean bound because it's all within 50 miles of an oceanway. So we wanted to help them try to solve that problem. So we created this mobile baling system. We put it in a shipping container, created these bags that would help them be able to collect the materials throughout the island. And we started really simply, like number one, plastics, your PET water bottles. That was a huge problem for the island in particular, and something that easily would blow into the ocean. And number two, plastics, as well as any of their aluminum cans. This baler that you see in the back, that orange device, will allow you to have up to 6 chambers, which means you can compress up to 6 different materials with one piece of equipment. For now, those bales are making their way back to Michigan for us to do more analysis on. But our real goal isn't to send things from the Virgin Islands up to Michigan, because there's not a lot of carbon sense in that, but is to help them figure out where in that region can we help build the infrastructure to recycle those materials where they're generated. And we're getting closer, but there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. I mentioned earlier what post-industrial plastic is, but I think it's important that we talk about the difference between what post-consumer and post-industrial means. I don't know if anyone has ever looked at a ream of paper, but that's where I first noticed these different terms. Sometimes on a ream of paper, it'll say 100% recycled, 50% PIR, post-industrial, 50% post-consumer. Why does it matter? It's all getting recycled. Well, because the off-fall from manufacturing, whether it's a printer trimming its pages, right? That's really clean material. It's source segregated material. It's easy to recycle. The stuff that is post-consumer, that's already reached, it's had its full life, is much more complicated. Think about a water bottle. It might be made out of PET, but that cap is made out of polypropylene. It's got a label on it. It's got glue in it. It's a whole different hot mess of, situation now that it's at its end of life. And if you think, when people think about recycling, I'll switch to the next slide so you can have a visual. You usually think about what happens in your kitchen, bathroom, and laundry room. You just even say the word recycling, and that's where your head goes, because you buy products, you use the product, and there's this end of life waste product. That is best served by single stream curbside recycling. And if you live in the city of Holland, that's a service that's provided through Republic. You can go onto the Republic website and get a list of all the things that are allowed to be in your single stream. But it's basically your bottles, your papers, your metals. It's not that we can't take some of that stuff, but we don't do post-consumer curbside plastics. That is where it just doesn't make sense. And the reason why is because it's too light. It doesn't weigh anything. And I have a couple slides to go into more detail. But this truck that the waste haulers use is a packer truck. They're packing it. They're densifying it. They're making it weigh something so that they can make 35 stops before going back to the base, dumping it out, and having it go through this type of sortation system. Well, we don't sort material like that. That's not what we do. Now, once they've sorted it, they're going to put it in these bales, and then those bales get marketed to the people who actually recycle, right? So that's where it gets kind of confusing, I think. And I am always open to hear ideas of how to explain this better, because I feel like I keep trying and it's still not quite out in the community yet. But we don't even recycle PET. That's not what we do. PET, if you want to recycle it, it's a very difficult material to recycle. It's hygroscopic. There's all kinds of challenges with it. And there's people who do it really, really well in Ohio. And it's okay, because if you've baled it, you can send a 40,000-pound load by truck to Ohio, and they will make sure that material gets processed and reused into the circular economy. It's good, but it's not what we do. Another picture. All right. So what can you do with panels? Now, we do some of the weird things, right? Because you couldn't put, I guess you could put your appliance at the end of the road and buy a sticker and have them pick it up. But if you bring it to us, we'll pay you for it. So that's why you should bring it to us, is instead of having it be a charge to recycle, our whole model is based on being able to give people money for the materials that they're recycling. We recycle Christmas tree lights. I always have to say that because so many of those get thrown away every year. And the copper wire that's in there is enough. We're able to recover that. We can strip all the casing right off those lights and recover that copper and make sure it enters the circular economy. You could bring us laptop batteries. You could bring us anything that's an electronic, and we are going to make sure that that material is data securely removed, right? because that's a big deal. Like, don't be afraid of taking your computers and your phones and all that stuff to a PadNose location. We have a very secure process for how we handle that to make sure that your data doesn't get stolen or leaked or out into the public. You're already doing the first step, right? You're here, you're educating yourself. Utilize your curbside bin if you live in an area where that's appropriate, or you can bring your stuff to West Shore and they will take it. It's over by the airport. Look out for community recycling days. I know Holland has a number of them. They certainly do like electronic days and stuff like that, although you're always welcome to bring your electronics in anytime. Most importantly, buy quality products that last. Most of you in this room may understand that better than my teenagers or younger people, but it really does make a difference, right? Like, buying something that lasts will save you money in the long run. And don't buy products, don't fall for it. Don't fall for the greenwashing. If I have one more person come to me and say, I've got this great idea. We have all this waste from the hemp industry and I'm going to put it in all the plastic because there's waste here. Great. Now you just made that plastic not recyclable again, right? So any of these sorts of things that people say, this is environmentally friendly because we use the sawdust from the blah, blah, blah. We use chicken feathers. We use whatever. I don't care. Like, any additive in the plastic makes it harder to recycle. So think when you go to buy products, how simple is it? Is the product like really overly complex? Because the flip side is, right, you saw how we shred cars. Some people have this idea that we can somehow disassemble the car and recycle all the individual pieces and parts of a car. And I hate to say like it's impossible just because, well, one of our values is see the possible. But if it takes them a long time to build a car and you sell the car like for thousands and thousands of dollars, I think the cheapest car now is like $30-some thousand. How on earth, when that car from a recycling standpoint is worth about $300 to $500, am I going to put that labor in? Like, isn't going to happen. So when people start saying, well, this has been assembled for disassembly, ask yourself, am I going to disassemble it? Because if you're going to disassemble it, maybe. But even then, not only would you have to disassemble this chair, you would have to have enough background and knowledge to know what to do with every piece of that chair. Now, there is technology being developed to start to watermark the plastics on a micro level so that some of that identification can happen. They're working on QR codes that you can scan. And then, like, as a consumer, you might know everything that's in there. But we don't have any standard process. Like PadNose, I already said, was unique in our diverse processing capabilities. If that product ends up in South Carolina or Texas or Tennessee or wherever, I mean, there's no PadNose. So until we grow in those markets, the rules might change depending on where that product is really going to end up at the end of life. Think about the number of single-use items you have in use. So one of my examples here, I better check on time. Ooh, we're going to run out of time. I knew this was going to be a good talk. One of my examples for here is the plastic bag, right? You go to the grocery store and you get the plastic bag. Now, I'm probably going to tell you some things that you aren't expecting. I don't think plastic bags are all that bad. And you want to know why? First of all, they're clean. And if there's one thing that we learned about E. coli or about COVID is things like E. coli and germs spread really, really easily. And if you have the inexpensive, like reusable bags that you buy at the grocery store, the ones that are usually $1 or $2, do you wash it ever? They don't hold up in a washing machine. So like it's more than 10. It's probably, I haven't done the math. So I'm going to be a little cautious. It's probably 50 times more plastic in that reusable plastic cheap bag than what's in the tea sack that comes for free at the grocery store. So if you really do all of the numbers from a carbon footprint standpoint, you have to ask yourself, is that really better? Now, I do use reusable bags, but I use reusable bags made by a company in Grand Rapids called Public Thread. Everything in this bag, this is a seatbelt from one of our cars that we recycled. And I'm sorry for my people that are on the virtual call. You can't see this, but it's really cool. It's a seatbelt and it's the handle of my bag. The fabric is all from the furniture industry. Nothing on here was purchased. It was all of it has been upcycled. and reused. So I have bags, grocery bags that are like this. I can wash them. I can reuse them. They work great. You know, there's no problem. And I make sure that that happens. Now, okay, maybe I'm doing something better. Some people will say, well, what about paper bags? Well, when you do the numbers, paper's not so bad because it is really easily to recycle, but a lot more energy goes into that paper bag to create it than it does in that plastic bag. So you just, if there's nothing else I could leave you with, it's just to be curious, stay open-minded, like ask the deeper questions. Don't just believe the first thing one person says. You know, there's something in lean manufacturing called the 5 whys. I like 7 whys is even better. Every time you go through, ask why, until you think you get to the root answer or the root cause of a situation. It looks like we've got a question.
The recycling of plastic bags. So I understand Meijer and Walmart are now gathering plastic bags for recycling. Is that efficient?
Absolutely. And so I can't, for Meijer specifically, I'm very involved with them in that particular program. It is phenomenal. Not only can you bring your T-sack, that HDPE plastic bag with you when you go back to the grocery store, you can throw in the bread bags that you have, your Ziploc bags that you have, anything that is like a plasticky film type product can go with you. They 100% are baling that material and it's going into plastic lumber. It works. That is fully circular. Yes. Does color matter on that? It does not. That's a great question. So things like color impact the value of the material. Oh, I didn't repeat his question. He asked whether color matters. And it does not at that level. So there is a higher value to stretch wrap that has no color. But for anybody that's in this room and the average consumer, just don't even worry about it. I mean, if you have so much film that you have truckloads a week, talk to me about whether color matters. For you guys, just get it recycled. Like you're doing the right thing. It can go into the lumber. It's fine. It works.
The paper bag that we have has a large label on it, which is paper, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay?
Totally okay. Yeah. And paper is so widely recyclable. I mean, that is a product that can be recycled almost anywhere in the world. That's okay. So I will address this one just because it comes up a lot. If a sticker of any kind is attached to the paper, the adhesive that attaches it ends up drying out to a degree that it doesn't mess up the paper mill. It goes into I think of it like soup. It goes into this big vat and it mushes it all together with water to make the pulp, right? And that pulp, depending on the type of paper, has different fiber lengths. And the longer that fiber length is, the easier it is to recycle. And so things will start out as really beautiful white paper and eventually become a cardboard box, eventually become a cereal box, eventually become an egg carton. By the time it's an egg carton, really all you can do with it is compost it, just to be clear. But there's like a whole path that's well developed for that paper. And so it's fine. If the sticker is still on the sticker backing, that like shiny stuff that looks like wax, that adhesive is still active. That is a problem. It gums up the machine. So try not to recycle stickers like they're paper if they're still on the backing. But if they're on a box or a bag, no issue. You don't have to remove them.
Okay, we have a couple questions. Quickly, the company that made the recycling bag from Grand Rapids, could you repeat the name of that, please?
100%. Their name is Public Thread. Full disclosure, I am a board member. But they're awesome. I've actually known the owner for about 20 years, and she's really passionate about paying living wages and putting marginalized community members back to work. It's an awesome company, and she's well supported by the furniture companies. And we buy a lot of products that we give away to customers as well.
And then our number 5 household plastics recycled in any meaningful way?
That's a great question. So number 5 plastics is polypropylene. We recycle tons of polypropylene, but not single stream number 5. So when we talk about those plastic numbers and the chasing arrows that you see on things, I like to refer back to science. So if I were to say to you, amphibians, you would probably know, I mean, frogs and newts and salamanders and, you know, the things like you learned in elementary school or in biology class later on. But number 5 plastic, saying that is like saying amphibians. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, it could have a different melt flow. It could have different additives. It could be designed for cold temperatures, hot temperatures. It could have additives that make it like your bumper on your car so that if you bump something, it doesn't crack. All sorts of things can be added. There's hundreds of different kinds. So I need to not just know amphibians. I need to know you're talking about frogs. I need to know not just frogs, but that you're talking about a Costa Rican tree frog. And then I can tell you how it can be recycled. The MRFs, so those single stream carts, they get picked up by the waste hauler and go to a material recovery facility. That's what MRF stands for, are working to recycle the 5s. But today, it isn't really happening. There's some exceptions. So the Michigan State University campus has installed some robotics that is sorting the 5s and baling it. But a lot of the infrastructure we have in this area is still old enough that they can't sort them out. So they end up in what we call a 3 through 7 bale. Those 3 through 7 bales right now, and there's still market dynamics here. So trust me when I say today could change in a week. But for the most part, they're either going to a reclaimer that is going to further separate out those 3 through 7 so they can recover the number 5s, or it's going to a molecular recycler that's going to do pyrolysis, because most of the plastics that are in that bale have enough oil content that the pyrolysis process can separate it into naphtha, ultra diesel, and wax. Then those commodities can go out into the market. Now, we personally don't consider that recycling. It's something different, but it is better than putting it in the ground. Hopefully that answers the question. Oh, and don't forget to sell and donate your unwanted items because, you know, my kids might buy them. So we joke in our household because almost every week we have stuff we bring to Goodwill. It's pretty funny. That's the closest thrift store by us. And it really works, right? Like if you, or, you know, sometimes my husband will sell it on Facebook Marketplace, whatever. I mean, whatever, depends on what the product is and how much time we have. But just don't think that there's no one that would have a use for it. What's cool about Goodwill and many of the thrift stores is they have recycle centers now. I work with Goodwill all the time. So the products you bring to Goodwill that they can't do anything with, they try to sell it online if it's high value. They sell it in their stores if it's medium value. If it doesn't sell in the store, it moves on to the outlet where you buy things by the bag. If it doesn't sell there, it goes to their recycle center. And in that recycle center, we have worked with them to help them. It's easier for me to train them on how to identify and sort the different types of materials so that they can be recycled than it would be to reach every single community member and teach them about 1,000 different commodities. So don't feel bad bringing stuff to a thrift store because most of them are doing a pretty good job of making sure that those products are recovered to the best of their ability. What else are we doing? So I mentioned earlier some of the R&D that we're working on. So we built a space we call Sustainability City so that we could slow down. Because the first thing we found when we tried to answer questions about R&D is that, well, you know, in this particular facility is our plastics and paper plant. We're getting 20, 30 loads of semi trucks a day, right? So it's got to move really, really fast. That material is coming in, it's getting put into its whip rows, that's work in process, and it's getting processed and then back out the door in a very, very short order. We try to make sure everything we buy is sold within the same 30 days or less every single month. So there's not a lot of time when you're talking about thousands of commodities to sit on anything. So what would happen is we'd get something in from a manufacturer and be like, oh, there it went. we couldn't, you know, there was nowhere to problem solve. And like I could stand on the dock and did many days stand on the dock and watch it, but I couldn't really do anything about it because there was nowhere to put it. So we designated this 18,000 square foot space to be able to do those deep dives. And we came up with some ways to report and Pareto the information in a way that we could try to have the most impact as possible. So the customers who we thought we could have the most impact for, we'd slow down, schedule in a load to come into Sustainability City, and we would dive in. So I might take a Gaylord of material and separate it all out and be like, okay, well, if we did this, did that. I have equipment in my space that's more of the scale that a manufacturer would use. So most of our equipment is gigantic, right? Like it's designed for big production, lots of throughput. You're not, as a manufacturer, going to have space to put that in your facility, nor would there be a good ROI and a business case to do it. But there are smaller pieces of equipment like that orange Orwalk baler that we can have in the space. And now I can do the time trial. So when I go and talk to the customer and say, listen, baling, it's not that hard. It's not all this extra work. I have to bring all their stakeholders together because the people in the marketing team aren't going to think about it the same way as the shipping and receiving guy does. And half the times they don't even talk to each other in their own company. So I have to bring them together and help them see the possible that this is going to work. And I have to be able to speak in the language to each of those groups of stakeholders to help them be able to have a solution that's going to work, that's going to stand up. So we're able to do more of that. So how do these businesses recycle? I mean, basically we start with that waste audit, we do the material analysis, then we talk to them about what they could potentially landfill avoid and what the financials around that looks like, and then we help them with that process improvement. Here are some examples of some of the pictures that I use when I'm talking to them to help communicate. That's going to appeal to both the plant manager, the shipping and receiving doc, and the marketing people and the C-suite, depending on the company and their size. Ooh, it went by faster. I didn't expect that. All right. So on here, when we've got these densification ratios, all that means is that's how many less trucks or less packages if the material is densified at the source of generation. So when we go through this, right, if you bale your film versus your loose film, that's 19 less van trailers that have to go down the road. That's a huge carbon savings. Now, I can't tell you exactly what the carbon savings is because I need it on a miles the truck was driving. But if I'm working with a customer, I can go through and very specifically tell them what their carbon savings is going to be. And then they can put that in their sustainability report. That's going to appeal to their C-suite. It's going to appeal to their marketing team. But what's going to appeal to their operations people is you've reduced traffic in the plant. So if I am sorting this material and densifying it at the source of generation, now I'm not driving loose, lightweight materials all around my plant all day. We have had customers be able to eliminate 2 full-time roles doing non-value added work of moving waste product, right? And shifting those people into being more recycling experts and doing something of value for the company. So that really makes a difference. And it also improves safety because high-low traffic can be a major concern when we're talking about all that extra movement around the plant. So it's more than just the carbon savings and the financial savings. It's also about how you are operating in the plant from a lean manufacturing process. This is another example. So again, talking with large retail chains like a Meijer, they have pharmacies. And in theory, that number 2 plastic, that pill bottle, is a post-consumer product. If you were to have it at home, you could put it in your single stream bin, right? But if you're a pharmacy that's filling thousands of prescriptions and going from those bottles into the little orange bottles, you'd be blown away by how much waste pharmacies create. Just like it's truckloads and truckloads. So our MRF systems, our waste haulers and MRFs aren't set up to handle that kind of volume. And to boot, this is a difficult material because pill bottles have aluminum foil on them. There's often cotton in there. There's sometimes instructions that are really taped to the side of that bottle. You know, there could be spare medicine that somehow something got missed. Like there's a lot of things about this particular product that is hard to recycle. Even the fact that they're white bottles, white acts as a filler because you need so much colorant to make a product white versus any other color in the rainbow that it acts as a filler. And so the product becomes more brittle. It's not as easy to recycle as something that's black, as an example. So we worked with them and figured out a way to be able to grind it, turn it into a pellet, removing the contaminants, and now it goes into these office furniture weights. So if you open a filing cabinet, the reason why when you open the top drawer, the whole thing doesn't fall on you is because there's a counterweight in the bottom, and it's perfect for that. Now, I haven't quite figured out how to make it fully circular. And all full disclosure, like how am I going to get that counterweight back at the end of life? It's probably going to stay in the file cabinet. It's probably going to go through my process. It's probably going to end up in the ASR. So I still have work to do, but we're getting there. At least it's a step in the right direction. So the next century of recycling, things are really changing. The EV movement specifically is going to have huge ramifications for the recycling industry. And we're working on it. I think Randy will go into a little bit more detail, but those electric vehicles are really different than the cars that we're recycling today. It is dangerous. I mean, we have to have an electrician discharge the connect from the car to the battery. Those batteries can catch fire, you know, all sorts of things. Now they're perfectly safe. I'm not saying I actually own an EV, so I'm a big fan. So don't take my skepticism on the recycling side of it as bad. Like, I do think it is the right movement, but we have a lot of work to do as a recycler to figure out what we're going to do with the car of the future, because it is really different than the car of the past. And those batteries have a lot of precious minerals, rare earth metals, that are in not enough supply, right? So we have to be able to recover those somehow. So we're working on it. We'll get there eventually. All of the batteries that are out there. You see a picture over here of source segregated plastics being recycled. That's more what recycling looks like in a plastic recycling facility, not a MRF. It's all the same material type. And now we've got time for some more questions.
We have a question online.
Thank you.
First of all, Amy says she's so glad that Padnos is in Michigan and protects our water-rich state. But she mentions that she's part of a Facebook group called Buy Nothing. It keeps so much in circulation and out of landfills. And she also has a concern about Goodwill being a for-profit organization as opposed to the other thrift stores in the area that are
Goodwill's nonprofit. It's not for profit. So we'll start with that.
okay.
But it's not to say that other ones aren't great. I mean, there's a lot of good ones in this region. So feel free to support the one that you're passionate about. They're all good. We work with all of them. Goodwill's just big, right? So when I'm trying to build things on a national scale, they're everywhere, where the local one might not be. But I'm actually, I was a founding member of an organization called Local First, right? So the more you keep things local, support your locally owned businesses, the more you vote with those dollars locally, the more money stays in your community. So I'll never say not to use local, not ever. Yeah. Oh.
Kari, great presentation, by the way. So I'm an electronics guy, computer guy, and all that stuff. And historically, I've taken older equipment to Comp Renew.
Sure.
Do they work with you sort of on their back end, or how are you guys different competitors? How does that all work?
I would consider them, I put them in the category of friendly competitor. So they are a nonprofit, and I think that they do some really good work. And I think that they serve a vital need in the community. So like no shade thrown on them whatsoever. Sometimes market conditions work where I buy their material, and sometimes I'm not the best buyer, and that's okay too. Like that's how the economies have to work. They're a lot smaller than us. So, you know, what they're able to do, I think they do really well. They put a lot of those computers back to market so that people can buy used equipment. Like, it's all good. But yeah, sometimes they're a competitor, but sometimes not. Good organization.
Could you talk about pizza boxes?
Yes. I'm so excited that you asked. There's been a lot of controversy over that over the last couple of decades. So when I started in the industry about 15 years ago, I was told no pizza boxes. And the reason why is because most pizza boxes had a lot of grease, a lot of cheese, a lot of other on there. MRFs have, or I should say mills, paper mills have changed their tune quite a bit. So pizza boxes are technically okay to go in your recycling. Now that's your single, I still don't really want it, to be honest. I'm not set up to handle food waste, but if you put it in your curbside bin, it'll get recycled. You know, even they can handle, that curbside bin can handle up to 5% contamination. So that's important. Like when you are doing something like a mayonnaise jar, you know, like, and there's that little bit that's left right in the bottom and you can't get, it's okay. That system is designed to be able to handle that. We don't like to tell people it's okay to have any contamination because like that 5% turns into 20% like that. But you know, that in theory, the pizza box is actually okay. But if you got a deep dish and it was really greasy, maybe not that one, you know, just use some common sense.
Got it. Okay, the power plant recently imploded. Has Panos taken some of that stuff?
We sure have.
It's
Yeah.
right next door.
Yeah, I'm gonna, Carlin, that's a note for us to tell Randy. He's got a video of it. We should include that. It's pretty cool.
I can provide a little bit more perspective on that. I'm involved with the BPW. These numbers won't be exactly precise, but the total cost of the destruction and reprocessing and cleaning up that site was a little over $8 million. However, the cost of the city and BPW was around $5 million. And the difference is the recycled materials that virtually all went to Padnos. Some of them went here, but some of them were so large they had to go to, I think, Ann Street.
Probably, yeah, Turner, but yes.
You know, yeah, whatever. The
Close.
larger the larger facility.
Bigger shredder.
And so anyhow, there was about a $3 million recycling content of all the steel, the copper, and the other precious metals out of the generators, the windings, all those sorts of things. So yeah, a little more perspective.
When you ask a question, make sure you hold it up close to your mouth so they can pick it up.
2 products that schools produce, milk cartons and styrofoam trays.
Mm-hmm.
What you're doing in the Virgin Islands, could those little compactors be used at schools? Because they don't have a very big loading dock to keep.
They could be
the
used at
materials.
schools, but I still don't want the material. So I just want to make perfectly clear about that. And it's not, the milk cartons actually are okay. Milk cartons can be recycled, but it's just not at the scale that we operate is the best way I can put it. So it's better. So I always say, don't let best get in the way of better, not ever, right? So that mini baler is going to densify those milk cartons and trays about a 4-to-1 densification ratio, where the bales I'm looking for is more 20-to-1. So they're just not, it's not enough for what I do, but it does make it easier for them to manage those materials. The styrofoam, which technically is a trade name, it's EPS, is the actual official plastic name of it, is really problematic. It's a really big challenge because it's a 90-to-1 densification ratio on that material. I can't even touch it without going backwards financially. So but yeah, it serves a purpose. And there was a point in my career where I've been like, get rid of it. It's a terrible material. That changed for me during COVID. I'll be transparent about this, is I had a breast cancer journey that I went through and was on chemo, and you know, you're in that, getting that stuff, and I'm totally cancer-free now, so don't feel bad. But that cup that they give you for the water that you drink when you're in chemo is usually made out of EPS, and it's got to be clean. Like it works. It keeps things cold. It keeps things hot. It's economical. And do I want money being spent on teachers to educate my children, or do I want it spent on the trade to make sure my children's are fed? And those are really tricky questions that I'm not quite sure how to solve, but it's real. It's a real challenge.
This is a little Louis Padnos humor on the backside of that serious topic. We don't date our cars in my family. We marry them till death do us part. And a number of years ago, I had some really heavy steel that I put in the trunk of one of my cars, and I went to Padnos, went into the office, and he goes, "You got the title for that thing?" And I went, "No, it's my daily driver. It's in the trunk."
With all the street work going on now on Collin Park Drive and Ben Multi Avenue, I'm impressed with how quickly they can demolish an entire length of street. All that concrete one day and it's gone. Could you track what happens to all that concrete for us a minute?
Yes, and except I'm not going to remember the name of the company in Holland that does it off the top of my head right now. There are companies that are specific that do concrete recycling. So make sure if concrete's different than asphalt, two totally different products. But there is a place in Holland, and thank you, that will take that and they crush it and then they use it for things like the underlayment of new roads and all sorts of stuff. And there's other ones in Grand Rapids if you are in that area that do similar work. They can. So when people get concerns around concrete, it's more around the energy consumption it takes to make new concrete. But the concrete places, like there's a big one up in Charlevoix, Michigan, they are starting to take more and more of the waste that can't be recycled to fuel the energy for those plants being manufactured. But truthfully, I'm not a concrete expert, so I don't want to talk too much about it, but I can tell you that they're trying to do their part to make it better. There also is like the Covanta plant. Actually, I think it has a new name now. It got bought out by somebody. But the waste to energy plant that's in Grand Rapids, there's something called fly ash that comes out of that process, and they're using that now as an additive into the concrete as well. And then it counts as a green building product.
A little bit more about the concrete. So Brewer City Dock, they do both concrete and asphalt. As you come down Pine and turn, you'll see, in fact, right, I saw it this morning, you'll see a huge pile of chunks of concrete. They get enough, and there's a company, is a guy who has the crusher that's up in Spring Lake, and they just left. They'll bring them down, set it up across the street from Brewer City Dock, and they will grind up. One time they'll grind up all the concrete, and then to your point, gets used for road bed. Another time they just finished this week where they crush asphalt and turn that into reuse for roads. If you watch what they're doing on 196 between here and Grand Rapids, they pull up all the old asphalt, or so if it's asphalt, there's grinders that grind it up. If there's cement, they have another process where they grind it up. And you'll see as you're driving by during construction, huge piles of the ground up concrete. And then that gets reused in when they lay the new road. So the road has a reused contour content. You saw it down here when they did 31 down towards Saugatuck. So the road folks do that all the time. I'm not a scientist, but I observe just what's going on so that they reuse that stuff all on a very regular basis.
They absolutely do. And there's a lot of that in the construction industry in general. Like they're very specific types of recyclers that do what they call construction C&D, construction and demolition waste. I'm just not an expert in it, but there's a whole world of that.
What about small batteries? I've saved them and then I end up throwing them away.
Yeah, so small household batteries. So when we talk about batteries and it's got like a 9-volt on it, or it's a C or a D battery, AAA, those batteries, we will take those. There's a small charge to recycle them. There isn't really the benefit cost-wise. You can also, I want to make sure that they still have it, but used to be there's Battery Plus stores, and where those stores are, you could bring the batteries back and take them back. Best Buy has things where you can drop off the batteries. So there's a few options. Don't throw them away because it really isn't good for the landfill.
Menards also does.
Menards does here.
We have a question from online. Does Padnos accept used consumer electronics such as printers, monitors, and is there a charge for those?
Great question. So the short answer is yes, we accept them. When we charge, it's usually because it's an old enough monitor that there's hazardous stuff in it. So the newer flat screens most often aren't a charge, like laptops, no charge. We actually pay for laptops because there's enough precious metals. You think about, we're paying based on the metal recovery. So that will help you just kind of understand if something by weight, not by volume, because volume and weight are very different things when it comes to plastic and metal. If something is at least 50% metal by weight, or it's got a lot of precious metals in it, things that a magnet doesn't stick to. So magnets are really useful, right? Because ferrous, if you go back to your periodic table, is iron, and that's what is magnetic. All of the other things on the elemental, aluminum, copper, gold, none of that will a magnet stick to. So if your magnet doesn't stick to it and you know it's a metal, it probably has a high value and it's worth trying to take to a patent office is my short answer. You're going to get some money for it. If it's a big one of those old school TVs, we charge for those. There is no cheap way to recycle them, unfortunately. There's a cost to do it, but we do take them.
Your last slide talked about the next century for recycling and looking specifically at what you do in your ROI. And you mentioned electric vehicles and where that whole industry is going. How will that change your business model? If you look at the contents of an EV, which is very different than the traditional vehicles that you're smashing and netting certain things out of. So what does the model look like for the whole recycling industry, with a big piece of that being recycling old vehicles?
It's a great question. I can't tell you I have it 100% figured out, but we have a team of people that are working very hard on it, and I'm part of that team. I can tell you that the recycling of the battery itself is where the value is going to end up being, and that is what we're innovating around the most. Now, if the plastics really take over and the car is now not metal at all and it's all plastic, that's a whole different ball of wax. Luckily, I've got 15 years to figure it out about, yeah.
Okay, there's maybe wait for next week, but tell a little about Louis Padno's story.
Oh, sure. So, Louis, when he was 14 years old and in Russia, it was a very impoverished area at the time, was a Jewish immigrant. He made his way through Europe. He paused in the Netherlands, which is where he ended up learning how to speak Dutch fluently, went to Ellis Island, like most immigrants, to the US, and then ended up in Chicago. So he worked in Chicago for a year or so, literally with a cart, back and forth, trading rags and furs. And that's when he ended up coming to West Michigan. As the people said, hey, you speak Dutch. We think that there's a really good opportunity there. Why don't you go over there? And he's like, great. And that's how he started. And it was really the third generation that grew the company the most. That's when we started buying other recyclers up and expanding. And then our next large surge was when the fourth generation took charge.
We have a question online from Gary, who asks about single stream. He realizes that's not your specialty, but he wants if you have any advice on how homeowners can avoid adding to the plastic ocean garbage patch.
Yeah, well, I think it's always good to have reusable stuff, right? Like I keep a reusable coffee mug and a reusable water bottle in my car all the time. So if I can do reusable, yeah, you've got a coffee mug right over there. That's great. Reusables, my first choice, just things that are going to last is always first. It gets a little complicated because some restaurants don't want you to bring your product into them. Like they're worried about FDA requirements and regulations around that. So that can be tricky. But supporting the businesses that have more environmentally, sound packaging for your takeout materials and stuff like that is a good way to start. Beyond that, like recycling does cost money. So I think there's kind of this weird dichotomy where people somehow feel like they should have a right to have their stuff recycled. And I don't get it. I mean, that single stream stuff, it's mixed. It's really hard. It costs a lot of money to recycle it. And you guys, you can vote to pass a millage so that there's more money to build more infrastructure. I mean, you could do that, right? But it's not like there's no magic button here. Like it costs money to recycle this stuff. So the money has to come from somewhere. There's no business case for it to just be free. Like it doesn't work that way. So get involved. I know the sustainability manager here in Holland and he's as good as you could get. He's doing a lot to try to improve the recycling here in Holland.
One more shameless comment for HASP. There is interest in starting a recycling environmental awareness small interest group at HASP. So stay tuned to HASP happenings for information on that.
Another thing I could add that we didn't talk about today, but I think might interest you guys is when we, the Sustainable Business Forum recently did a deep dive on the landfills around Michigan. And I don't have the final report, but what I can tell you is 70% of what's going into the landfills is food waste. It's not even plastic, it's food waste that could be composted. So learn something about composting. I compost at home. It's so easy. Matter of fact, my husband comes from a long line of farmers. So he's like, what do you, I mean, of course we compost. Like, why would we not compost? Why would we spend money to throw this stuff away? It doesn't make any sense. It's not like a new thing, right? Composting has been around a long time and it's not smelly and it's really easy to do. So try that.
Okay, I think we're done with questions right on time at 11 o'clock.
Perfect.
Gosh, Kari, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming
Thank
today.
you. And thank you for being such an engaged audience.
I learned so much, and I just want to mention you're going to have an opportunity to learn even more. Part 2 of this discussion is next week with Randy Knibbe, and I can guarantee you he is as enthusiastic as Kari is about recycling in my
Maybe more.
conversations with him. So it's bound to be another terrific presentation. Thank you to Louis Padnos for supporting us and supporting our community. I think they're doing great things. So thank you for attending today, and we'll see you all in a week.